I was standing in the cold December night, breath hanging in the frozen air like smoke, when I realized my mother wasn't going to say anything. She just stood there in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, watching me walk away from the only home I'd ever known. Gordon's voice was still echoing in my head. Get out. Get out of my house and don't come back. My stepfather. The man who was supposed to be family. The man my mother married thinking he'd save us from years of struggling alone. He'd just thrown me out like garbage. And she let him. But let me back up because you need to understand how we got here. You need to know why that night changed everything, not just for me but for everyone involved. My name is Calden Pierce, and I spent 7 years walking on eggshells in my own home. 7 years of keeping my head down, my voice quiet, my dreams small enough not to threaten a man who couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding. Gordon Hale swept into our lives when I was 17, all charm and confidence and money. Everyone in town thought my mom had won the lottery. Wealthy contractor, nice truck, bigger house. Finally, things were looking up for the Pierce family. Except nobody saw what happened when the front door closed. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Gordon had this talent for making me feel worthless without ever raising his hand. It was always the comments. The sneers. You think you're better than everyone with those books? He'd say when he caught me studying. Real men work with their hands, not waste time on college. Never mind that I was busting my back at the auto shop and pulling double shifts at the diner just to pay my own tuition. Never mind that I never asked him for a dime. My mother would try to smooth things over. You know how he is, she'd whisper after he'd storm off from dinner because I'd mentioned wanting to apply for graduate school. He doesn't mean it. But I knew better. Gordon meant every single word. He just knew how to say them when nobody else was listening. Still I stayed. Because Mom looked happier than she had in years. Because after my dad died when I was 12, she'd struggled so hard to keep us afloat, and I couldn't be the reason she lost that happiness. And maybe, deep down, some stupid part of me thought if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, made myself small enough, Gordon might actually see me as something other than competition. That fantasy died the night he found my acceptance letter. I'd gotten into a graduate engineering program upstate. Full scholarship. It was everything I'd worked toward for 6 years. Every late night studying, every early morning shift, every time I bit my tongue when Gordon tore me down. I hadn't told Mom yet because I wanted it to be special. Wanted to see her face light up the way it used to when I brought home good report cards as a kid. Instead, Gordon found the envelope first. I walked in after a double shift at the shop, exhausted, my hands still stained with motor oil. Gordon was in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. The acceptance letter was in his fist, crumpled. Care to explain this? His voice had that edge that made my stomach drop. I froze. That's mine. You applied to schools 5 hours away? Without talking to your mother? You planning to just abandon her here? My chest tightened. Gordon, it's graduate school. It's been my goal since. Don't you dare talk back to me. He slammed the letter on the coffee table. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No respect. No gratitude. You've been living under my roof, eating my food, driving that piece of junk truck I paid to fix, and this is how you repay us? By running away. I didn't ask you to fix anything, I said quietly. Too quietly. I've been paying my own way since. You ungrateful little leech. His face went red. I've done everything for this family. Everything. And you sit there acting like you're too good for us. Mom appeared in the doorway. Gordon, please, let's just talk about. No, Marion. He pointed at the door. I'm done. If he wants to leave so bad, he can get out right now. Get out of my house and don't come back. The silence that followed felt like glass shattering in slow motion. I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. Her eyes were wet, her hands trembling. She was torn between the man she married and the son she raised. I waited for her to say stop, to say no, to say anything that meant I still mattered. She didn't. So I walked to my room, packed my duffel bag with whatever fit, and headed for the door. Gordon stood there with his arms crossed, watching me like I was proving his point. Like I was the problem. Like I'd always been the problem. I stopped at the threshold. The cold air hit my face. "You'll regret this someday," I said. Not loud. Not angry. Just fact. Gordon laughed. Actually laughed. "Get out." So I did. I walked into that frozen December night with everything I owned in one bag. No plan. Nowhere to go. Behind me, the door slammed hard enough to shake the windows. And my mother never said a word. What would you do if the person who raised you just stood there and watched you get thrown out? Would you forgive them? Or would something break inside you that never quite heals? Drop your answer below. I really want to know. The inside of my truck smelled like old coffee and regret, mixed with the sour tang of sweat-soaked clothes I hadn't been able to wash in days. I've been sleeping in it for 3 nights now, parked behind the auto shop where I worked, tucked in the back corner near the dumpsters where nobody would notice or ask questions. The December cold seeped through the metal frame no matter how many blankets I piled on, no matter how tightly I wrapped myself up like a human burrito trying to trap whatever body heat I had left. Every morning I'd wake up, with frost coating the windows in delicate patterns, my joints stiff and aching, and my breath visible in the air like tiny ghosts escaping my lungs. Every night I'd tell myself it was temporary, that this was just a rough patch, that I'd figure something out soon, that tomorrow would be different. But pride has a funny way of keeping you stuck in places you should have already left. Rick, my boss at the shop, noticed on the second day. I was in early. Too early for someone who supposedly had an apartment to get ready in, and I hadn't showered. My hair was greasy, my clothes wrinkled, and I probably smelled worse than I realized. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a wrench without meeting my eyes and pointed at a Chevy Silverado that needed brake work. But at lunch, when I was trying to make myself invisible in the break room, he cornered me by the vending machine, blocking my exit with his broad shoulders. "You sleeping in your truck, kid?" I froze with a bag of chips halfway to my mouth, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. "No. Just got here early to get a head start on the day." He gave me that look. The one that said he'd been around long enough, seen enough desperate people, to know a lie when he heard it. His eyes were kind but firm. "My couch is open if you need it. No strings attached. No questions asked. Just a warm place to sleep." Something in my chest cracked a little, like ice splitting under pressure. "I'm good." "Really? Just between apartments right now. New place doesn't open up until next week." Rick nodded slowly, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he decided not to say. He didn't believe me. I could see that much written across his weathered face, but he respected the boundary I'd drawn. "Offer stands if you change your mind. Anytime. Day or night." I didn't change my mind. Wouldn't. Because accepting help meant admitting I had nowhere to go. Meant admitting that Gordon had actually won. Meant admitting that I was exactly what he'd called me. A burden, a leech, someone who couldn't make it on their own. Meant proving every cruel word he'd ever said was true. So I kept sleeping in my truck, my back pressed against the cold metal, my neck cramping from the awkward angle. Kept showing up to work exactly on time, scrubbing my face with hand soap in the shop bathroom, and hoping nobody noticed. Kept pretending everything was fine while Christmas lights twinkled on every house I passed, and families gathered inside warm homes with people who actually wanted them there, people who belonged somewhere. At night, when the cold got so bad my fingers went numb even inside my gloves, when I couldn't feel my toes and my teeth chattered so hard my jaw hurt, I'd think about my mother's words. The ones she used to say when things got hard after Dad died, when the bills piled up and the grief felt suffocating. "If you don't have power, have patience. Patience will hand you the power you deserve." I never understood what she meant back then. It sounded like something from a fortune cookie, vague and useless. Now, shivering in a truck bed with everything I owned stuffed into a duffel bag and 2 plastic grocery bags, I understood even less. What power was I supposed to be waiting for? What was patience supposed to give me except more cold nights and more shame? The 4th night was the worst. Snow started falling around midnight, fat flakes drifting down from a sky I couldn't see, covering the windshield in a thick blanket of white that blocked out what little light the parking lot had. I couldn't run the engine for heat because I'd run out of gas money 3 days ago and wouldn't get paid until Friday. So I just lay there in the back seat, wrapped in every piece of clothing I had, 2 hoodies, my work jacket, a beanie pulled down over my ears, watching my breath fog up the cab in thick clouds that hung in the air before slowly dissipating. That's when I started thinking about giving up, about calling Gordon and apologizing for whatever he thought I'd done wrong, for whatever crimes he'd invented in his head to justify throwing me out, about crawling back on my hands and knees and accepting that maybe he was right, maybe I was ungrateful, maybe I was a leech, maybe I didn't deserve better than this. Maybe this freezing truck was exactly what I'd earned. But then my phone lit up the darkness, the screen painfully bright in the black interior of the truck. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But something made me swipe to accept, some instinct I couldn't name. Calden. The voice was shaking, breaking on the syllables of my name. Aunt Nina. My blood went cold, colder than the December air surrounding me. What's wrong? It's your mom. She was crying, her words coming out in hitching gasps. She's in the hospital. You need to come.
Right now.
Please. I didn't ask questions. Didn't think. Didn't process. I just scrambled into the front seat, turned the key with shaking hands, and prayed the engine would start despite running on fumes. It coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The hospital was 20 minutes away, but felt like hours, like time had stretched and warped into something endless. My mind raced through every possibility, each one worse than the last. Heart attack, stroke, car accident, something with Gordon. Had he hurt her? Had they fought? Had everything finally exploded? The roads were slick with snow, treacherous and barely visible, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the wheel, my knuckles white with tension. When I burst through the emergency room doors, the fluorescent lights blinding after the darkness, Aunt Nina was waiting in the lobby, pacing back and forth in front of the reception desk. Her face was pale, drained of color, her eyes red and swollen from crying. What happened? My voice came out harsher than I meant, sharp with panic and fear. She fell. At home. Down the stairs. She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Gordon called the ambulance, but she stopped, like the rest of the sentence was too heavy to lift, too terrible to speak out loud. She's asking for you. She won't stop asking. You need to go in. Have you ever gotten a call that made your whole world stop? That made everything else disappear, except getting to someone you love? Tell me in the comments. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with the weight she'd been carrying. She was lying in a hospital bed that seemed too big for her, swallowing her up in white sheets and thin blankets, tubes running from her arm to bags of clear fluid hanging on silver poles, monitors beeping softly in a rhythm that should have been comforting but only made my anxiety worse. Her face was pale, drained of the color and life I associated with her, bruised along one side in shades of purple and yellow that made my stomach turn. When she saw me standing in the doorway, tears immediately filled her eyes, spilling over before she could even try to stop them. You came. Her voice was barely a whisper, raspy and weak, like speaking took effort she could barely afford. I pulled a chair close to the bed, the legs scraping against the linoleum floor, and took her hand in both of mine. It felt fragile, like paper that might tear if I held too tight, the bones prominent beneath skin that seemed almost translucent under the harsh hospital lighting. Of course I came. Did you think I wouldn't? I wanted to call you sooner. The tears spilled over faster now, running down her cheeks and onto the pillow. Weeks ago. Every day. But Gordon wouldn't let me. He took my phone, said I didn't need it. He said you made your choice and I needed to respect that. That you wanted nothing to do with us. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt, pressure building behind my eyes. Mom, what happened? Nina said you fell down the stairs. She looked away, turning her face toward the window where darkness pressed against the glass. That's when I knew. That's when I saw it written across her features. The shame in her eyes, the fear that lived there like a permanent resident, the exhaustion of carrying a secret too heavy for too long, of protecting someone who didn't deserve protection. He's been different lately, she said quietly, her voice so soft I had to lean in to hear. Worse than before. Drinking more. Getting angry over nothing. Over everything. Little things that never mattered before. I told him I wanted to visit Nina for a few days, just to get some space to breathe, and her voice cracked like ice breaking. He said I was abandoning him like you did. That everyone leaves him. That he gives everything and gets nothing back. He grabbed my arm and I pulled away, and I lost my balance at the top of the stairs. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing closer, the air getting thinner. Did he push you? Calden, don't. Mom. I leaned forward, making her look at me. Did he push you down those stairs? She closed her eyes, tears streaming from beneath her lids, her lips pressed together in a tight line. Didn't answer. Wouldn't answer. But the silence said everything her words couldn't. The silence was a confession she couldn't bring herself to speak out loud. I sat there holding her hand, feeling rage build in my chest like a fire I couldn't put out, flames licking up my throat and behind my eyes. All those years of his comments, his subtle jabs that cut deep, his control disguised as care, his need to make everyone around him feel small so he could feel big, it had finally turned into this. Into my mother lying in a hospital bed with bruises on her face, making excuses for a man who hurt her, protecting someone who'd pushed her down a flight of stairs. I'm not leaving you, I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to keep it steady. Not again. Not ever. You didn't leave me, sweetheart. You need to know that. She opened her eyes, red and swollen, and looked at me with an intensity that cut through everything else. I let you go. I made that choice. I should have. She stopped, crying harder now, her shoulders shaking. I should have said something that night. I should have stood up for you, defended you, kicked him out instead. I just thought if I kept the peace, if I didn't make waves, if I stayed quiet and small and agreeable, everything would be okay. That he'd calm down. That things would get better. It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But it is. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength, her eyes urgent and desperate. I chose him over you. I let him throw you out into the cold because I was too scared to lose him, too scared to be alone, too scared to start over. And look where it got me. Look where it got both of us. I stayed with her until visiting hours ended, the clock on the wall ticking away minutes that felt both too fast and too slow. Stayed until she fell asleep, her breathing finally steady and even, her hand still holding mine like an anchor. And when the nurse finally appeared in the doorway, her expression apologetic but firm, and told me I had to go, I kissed my mother's forehead gently, careful to avoid the bruises, and promised I'd be back first thing in the morning before the sun even came up. But I wasn't going home. Not yet. I had something to take care of first. If someone hurt the person you loved most, could you stay calm? Could you walk away and let justice take its slow, uncertain course? Or would something inside you demand immediate action, demand that you do something, anything, to make it right? Let me know below. Gordon was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, hunched over a steaming mug in the dim light of early morning. He didn't even look up. Just kept drinking his coffee like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't shifted on its axis. Like my mother wasn't lying in a hospital bed with bruises on her face and broken ribs because of him, because of his hands and his anger. Well, he said, still staring at his mug like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked. Look who crawled back. I didn't respond. Didn't give him the satisfaction. Just headed straight for the cabinet above the sink where Mom kept her medication organized in neat rows. Blood pressure pills. Anxiety medication. Thyroid supplements. The stuff she needed daily, the things that kept her body functioning properly. Don't think you can just waltz in here playing hero, Gordon continued, his voice gaining that edge I knew too well. That superiority. That condescension that made every word feel like a weapon. She doesn't need you. I take care of her. I've always taken care of her. I'm the one who's been here. I grabbed the pill bottles one by one, reading the labels carefully to make sure I had everything, and put them in a plastic bag I found under the sink. Kept my back to him, my movements deliberate and controlled. "You hear me talking to you?" He stood up now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I could feel him behind me, his presence heavy and threatening, taking up space the way he always did. "You left, remember? You walked out that door without looking back, without a word. Now you want to act like you're some kind of savior? Like you're the good guy." I turned around slowly, taking my time, letting the silence stretch. Looked him dead in the eye without flinching or looking away. He was smaller than I remembered. Maybe I'd grown taller in the months since I'd been gone. Maybe he'd shrunk somehow, diminished by his own choices. Or maybe I was finally seeing him for what he really was, a scared, angry man who only felt big when he was making other people feel small, who only felt powerful when someone else was powerless. "I'm taking Mom's medication," I said calmly, my voice steady and even. "She'll need it at the hospital, and when she gets out. She's got everything she needs here. I've got it handled." Clearly. I let that single word hang in the air between us, heavy with meaning. Let him hear the accusation in it, the judgment, the truth he didn't want to face. His face went red, flushing from his neck up to his forehead, the color of rage and shame mixing together. "Watch your mouth in my house. You don't get to come in here and disrespect me. Your house." I almost laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. "You really think this is your house? I paid for it. I fixed it up when it was falling apart. I built this life from nothing. You married into it," I said, each word precise and deliberate. "There's a difference. A big one." That hit something deep. I could see it register across his face like a physical blow. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. His hands balled into fists at his sides, knuckles going white. For a second I thought he might actually swing at me, might let that rage finally boil over into violence.
Part of me wanted him to.
Wanted an excuse to defend myself, to fight back against years of verbal abuse with something physical and real. But he didn't. He just stood there, his whole body shaking with rage he couldn't quite unleash, trying desperately to find words that would hurt me the way I'd just hurt him, searching for ammunition he'd used successfully in the past. "You're nothing," he finally said, his voice shaking. "You're an ungrateful leech who's been living off me for years, taking and taking without giving anything back. Everything you have I gave you. That truck you drive? I fixed the engine when it died. That roof over your head growing up? I paid for it. The food in your mouth? I provided it. You're nothing without me. Nothing." I picked up the bag with Mom's medication, the plastic crinkling in my hand. Walked toward the door with measured steps. Stopped right next to him, close enough to smell the coffee on his breath and see the fear hiding behind the anger in his eyes. "Maybe," I said quietly, my voice low and calm in a way that seemed to unsettle him more than shouting would have. "But I've never pushed someone down the stairs. I've never taken what wasn't mine and pretended it was. I've never hurt someone I claimed to love." His eyes widened slightly, just a fraction, like he heard something in my voice he'd never heard before. Something that told him the balance of power had shifted permanently, that the scared kid he used to intimidate was gone. I walked out, leaving him standing alone in a kitchen that felt smaller than it used to. That felt less like home and more like a prison someone else had built around themselves, brick by brick, choice by choice, until the walls were too high to climb and too thick to break through. When someone tears you down for years, when do you finally realize they're the small one, not you? When do you see that their cruelty was never about your worth, but always about their fear? Drop your thoughts below. 2 days later, my mother died in her sleep. The doctors said it was peaceful. Said her heart just gave out. Said sometimes the body decides it's had enough and there's nothing anyone can do. But I knew better. I knew it wasn't just her heart that gave out. It was years of stress, of fear, of keeping the peace at the cost of her own peace. The funeral was small. Aunt Nina, a few neighbors, some people from church. Gordon showed up in a black suit, playing the grieving husband. He cried at the service. Actually cried. Put his hand on my shoulder, like we were suddenly brothers in loss, like we were united by shared grief. I wanted to shove him off, wanted to tell everyone there what he really was. But I didn't. Because Mom would have wanted peace. Even in death, she would have wanted peace. After the service, while people were eating casserole and sharing memories, Aunt Nina pulled me aside. Her face was serious. "There's something you need to know," she whispered. "Your mom left a will." I blinked. "A will?" She nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "She had it drawn up 6 months ago. Gordon doesn't know about it. She asked me to keep a copy safe." She handed me an envelope. Plain white, my name written on the front in my mother's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, folded neatly. "My dear Calden," it started. "If you're reading this, I'm gone." I had to stop, had to breathe. Nina put her hand on my shoulder. "Please know that everything I did was to keep peace, not because I didn't love you. I know Gordon never treated you right. I've seen it, and I know you would never speak ill of him for my sake. But you deserve a life without fear." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. "I've left everything I had, my savings, the house, the land your father bought before he passed, to you. It's not much, but it's yours. Quietly, I've moved the title back to your name. Gordon doesn't know. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Love always, Mom." The air left my lungs. She'd known. She'd known all along what Gordon was. She'd seen how he treated me. And even when she couldn't stand up to him in life, she'd found a way to protect me in death. I looked up at Nina. "The house is mine?" She nodded. "Everything. The house, the land, her savings account. She made sure it was all in your name. Legally, Gordon has no claim to any of it." Across the room, Gordon was accepting condolences, shaking hands, playing his part perfectly. He had no idea what was coming. Have you ever discovered that someone loved you more than you realized? That they were protecting you even when you thought they'd abandoned you? This changes everything. Gordon's fist hit the table so hard the salt shaker jumped, rattling against the worn wood before toppling over and spilling white crystals across the surface. Neither of us moved to clean it up. "You think you can steal my house?" His voice cracked on the last word, raw and jagged. He was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, his footsteps heavy and erratic, back and forth between the refrigerator and the window. His face had gone purple with rage, veins bulging at his temples, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold draft seeping through the walls. After everything I did for her? After everything I gave up? I sat at that same table where he'd thrown me out weeks ago. The chair felt different now. Steadier. I was calm. Quiet. Watching him fall apart piece by piece. Watching the man who'd spent years making himself larger than life shrink before my eyes. "It was never your house," I said simply, my voice level and clear. He stopped pacing mid-step, his shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Turned toward me. Pointed a trembling finger directly in my face, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "I built this place. I paid the mortgage every single month for 7 years. I fixed the damn roof when it leaked during that storm in March. I painted these walls. I put food on this table. You think some piece of paper changes that? You think words on paper erase what I did? The piece of paper is the deed," I said, holding his gaze without blinking. "And it's in my name. Has been for 6 months. The look on his face was something I'd never seen before, not in all the years I'd known him. Shock rippled across his features. Disbelief. Confusion. Like his brain was short-circuiting, unable to process the words coming out of my mouth. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. "You're lying." It came out weak, almost a whisper. I pulled out the copy Nina had given me earlier that morning, the paper still crisp and official-looking. Slid it slowly across the table, the sound of it scraping against wood filling the silence between us. He snatched it up with both hands, his fingers shaking so badly the paper rattled. I watched him read. Watched his eyes scan the lines once, twice, 3 times as if repetition would change what was written there. I watched the color drain from his face, watched the red fade to white, Watched reality sink in like water into sand. Watched him realize that my mother, the woman he thought he'd dominated, controlled, bent to his will, had outsmarted him completely. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice hollow. She couldn't. There's no way she would do this without telling me. We talked about everything." "She did." I leaned back in the chair, letting my shoulders relax for the first time since walking into this house. 6 months ago. Quietly transferred everything back to my name. The house, the 40 acres of land my real father bought before he died, her savings account, the one you didn't know about. All of it. Every single thing. "Your real father?" He laughed, but it sounded hollow. Desperate. Like a man grasping at straws while drowning. "That man left you nothing but debt and broken dreams. I'm the one who pulled this family out of the gutter. I'm the one who made something of this place. I turned it from a shack into a home. And now it's time for you to leave," I said, the words coming out easier than I expected. The silence that followed was deafening. Oppressive. Gordon just stood there, the deed crumpled in his fist, his knuckles white with pressure, his whole world collapsing around him like a house of cards in slow motion. For years he'd made me feel powerless. Made me believe I was nothing without him, that I'd never survive on my own, that I should be grateful for his presence in our lives. And now, in one single moment, the tables had completely turned. The power had shifted. The dynamic had reversed. "You can't do this," he said, but his voice had lost its edge, lost that commanding tone he used to wield like a weapon. "I have nowhere to go. No family in the state. Nothing. Should have thought about that before you threw me out in December with nothing but a garbage bag and $50. He slammed the deed on the table hard enough to make the salt scatter further. "You're really going to do this? After everything we've been through? After all the years? You're going to throw me out like I'm nothing? Like I'm trash?" "I'm not throwing you out," I said calmly, each word deliberate and measured. "I'm asking you to leave. You have a week to pack your things and find somewhere else to go." "A week." He laughed again, bitter this time, the sound harsh and grating. "You're giving me a week to pack up 7 years of my life? 7 years of building and working and sacrificing. That's 6 days more than you gave me when you decided I wasn't welcome here anymore." Something in him broke then. I could see it happen in real time. See the exact moment when he understood that he'd lost. That his businesses were failing, his money was gone, his reputation was crumbling, and now the only thing he thought he had left, this house, this land, this foundation, wasn't even his. Had never been his. He grabbed his jacket off the chair, yanking it so hard the chair scraped across the floor. "You'll regret this. Mark my words. You think you're so smart, so righteous, so much better than me. But you're just like me. You're throwing me out for revenge, pure and simple." "No," I said, standing up slowly, meeting his eyes one last time. "I'm taking back what was always mine. What my real father worked for. What my mother protected. There's a difference between revenge and reclaiming what you never should have lost." He stormed toward the door, his footsteps thunderous against the floor, then stopped abruptly. Turned back one last time, his hand on the doorknob. "Your mother would be ashamed of you. She'd be disgusted by what you've become." That one hit different. Landed somewhere deep. But I didn't flinch. Didn't look away. "My mother made sure I'd be okay without you. She planned this. She knew exactly what she was doing. And she did it because she knew who you really were." Gordon walked out, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. The house shook. The pictures on the wall trembled. Then everything went quiet. Still. Empty in a way that felt more peaceful than lonely. I sat there for a long time after he left, alone in that kitchen, staring at the deed on the table. My mother's signature at the bottom. Neat and careful, her handwriting as familiar as my own. Her final act of love. Her way of saying she'd always been on my side, even when it didn't look like it. Even when she stayed silent. Even when I thought she'd chosen him over me. 2 days later, while going through the house room by room, I found unpaid bills stuffed in his desk drawer, shoved in the back like secrets he hoped would disappear. Business loans he'd defaulted on. Credit cards maxed out to their limits. Collection notices. Final warnings. The man who acted like he owned the world, who walked around like he was untouchable, was drowning in debt he couldn't escape. His empire was already crumbling, collapsing under its own weight. He just didn't want anyone to know. Didn't want to admit that the image he'd built was nothing but smoke and mirrors. When the person who made you feel small turns out to be the one who's broken, how does that change things? Let me know what you think below. 6 months passed like water through fingers, slipping away before I could fully grasp them, each day blending into the next in a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting. I spent those months fixing everything Gordon had let fall apart, every crack and broken piece he'd ignored or dismissed as unimportant. The leaky roof he'd promised to repair for 2 years but never did, always finding an excuse or claiming he'd get to it next weekend. The cracked driveway with weeds growing through the splits in the concrete. The garage door that stuck every single time it rained, requiring you to yank it with both hands until your shoulders ached. I repainted the kitchen the color Mom always wanted but never got, the color she'd shown me in a magazine once, her finger tracing the image wistfully. Pale yellow. Like sunshine captured in a room. Like hope made visible. I restored her garden too. The one she'd planted years ago before Gordon moved in, back when Dad was still alive, and slowly let die from neglect after Gordon decided it was a waste of water and time. Tomatoes, basil, oregano, thyme, and those purple flowers she loved that I never learned the name of, but could still picture her admiring every evening. Every morning I'd water them as the sun came up, the soil dark and rich under my hands, and think about her hands in that same soil, the way she'd hum old songs while she worked, the way her face would soften with something like peace. The town started to notice the changes. People I barely knew would slow down as they drove past, windows rolled down, nodding approvingly. Rick from the shop stopped by one afternoon in his beat-up Ford, handed me a cold beer dripping with condensation, and sat on the porch steps beside me without asking permission. "Place looks good," he said, surveying the yard with an approving eye. "Real good. Better than it has in years." "Thanks. Still got a lot to do." "You doing okay? Really?" He turned to look at me directly, his expression serious beneath his weathered baseball cap. I thought about it, really thought about it instead of giving the automatic answer. "Yeah, I think I am." And I was. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt like I could breathe fully, like there wasn't a weight sitting on my chest every waking moment. The house didn't feel heavy anymore, didn't feel like a place where you had to measure every word and watch every step. Didn't feel like walking on glass, waiting for something to shatter beneath you. I set up a small workshop in the garage, cleared out all of Gordon's junk that he'd hoarded for no reason, and started designing custom tools for local mechanics, specialty wrenches, diagnostic equipment modifications, things that made their jobs easier. Word spread the way it does in small towns. Soon I had more orders than I could handle, people calling and stopping by with requests and recommendations. Life became simple, quiet, predictable in a good way. The kind of peace my mother always talked about in wistful voices but never got to have for herself, always chasing it but never quite reaching it. Then one evening in late July, when the heat was just starting to break and the cicadas were singing their endless song, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Rick and I had plans to grab dinner later, but not until 8, and it was barely 6:30. I wiped my hands on a rag, leaving streaks of grease and paint, and headed to the door, figuring it was a neighbor needing to borrow something, or maybe someone looking for directions to the main highway. I opened it. Gordon stood on the porch, his shadow stretching long across the wooden boards. But he wasn't the Gordon I remembered. This man was thinner, his frame almost gaunt, his clothes hanging loose on his body like he'd borrowed them from someone larger. His truck was gone, he'd arrived on foot, walking up the driveway I'd just repaired. His face looked older, deeply tired, with lines carved around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there 6 months ago. The last half-year had aged him a decade, maybe more. "I need a place to stay," he said quietly, his voice stripped of all the bluster and command it used to carry. No anger. No threats. No demands. Just exhaustion that seemed to radiate from every part of him. Just for a few days. I lost the business. Sold everything I had just to pay off the creditors. Got nowhere else to go. Nobody else to ask. For a long moment, I just stared at him, my hand still on the doorknob, my mind racing through 1,000 responses. This was the man who'd called me a leech, who'd said I contributed nothing, who'd made me feel worthless, who'd thrown me out into December cold without a second thought, without mercy or hesitation, who'd made my mother's final years filled with tension and fear instead of the joy and comfort she deserved. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. Wanted him to feel exactly what I felt that December night when I had nowhere to go and winter was closing in. Wanted him to sleep in his car if he even still had one. Wanted him to know what it was like to have nothing and no one. But I heard my mother's voice in my head, clear as if she were standing beside me. Her words about patience. About silence being strength, not weakness. About being the kind of person who breaks cycles instead of continuing them. I stepped aside, pulling the door open wider. "You can stay in the guest room." Gordon blinked, his mouth opening slightly. Like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, like the words didn't make sense in the order I'd said them. "You're serious?"
Yeah.
"But just for a few days while you figure things out. And there are rules." He nodded quickly. Too quickly. Desperately. "Anything. I'll do anything. I'll follow whatever rules you want. No drinking.
Period.
You help with chores around the house, cooking, cleaning, yard work, whatever needs doing. And you respect this house. It's not yours. It never was. But you can stay until you get back on your feet and find something else." His eyes got wet, the rims turning red. He looked down at his worn boots, his shoulders sagging like a marionette with cut strings. "I don't deserve this. I know I don't." "You're right," I said, holding his gaze when he finally looked back up. "But my mother would have wanted it this way. She wouldn't have turned anyone away who needed help, even someone who hurt her." He walked inside slowly, carrying nothing but a faded backpack that looked like it had seen better days, everything he owned apparently fitting into one small bag. And for the first time since I'd known him, since the day he'd walked into our lives 7 years ago acting like he owned everything he touched, Gordon Hale had absolutely nothing to say. Could you open your door to someone who destroyed your peace? Someone who threw you away when you needed them most? Someone who made you question your worth and your place in the world? This is where it gets complicated. Living with Gordon was strange in ways I didn't expect, unsettling in its quiet mundanity after years of tension and explosions. He kept himself mostly like a ghost haunting rooms he used to command. Woke up early, earlier than me most days, made coffee in the old percolator Mom used to use, and did whatever chores I asked without complaint or negotiation. Fixed the fence that had been leaning dangerously for months, the posts rotted at the base. Cleaned gutters clogged with years of decomposing leaves and debris. Pulled weeds from the garden he'd once let die, working carefully around the new growth like he was afraid to damage something fragile. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? The past sat between us like a wall we both knew was there, solid and immovable, but neither of us wanted to acknowledge or try to scale. We moved around each other carefully, orbiting in separate circles that occasionally intersected in the kitchen or on the porch. But on the third night, something shifted in the atmosphere. Some invisible barrier cracking just slightly. I was in the kitchen making dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and red sauce from a jar, the kind of simple meal I'd been living on for months, when Gordon appeared in the doorway. He stood there awkwardly, his hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, like he didn't know if he was allowed to enter what had once been his own kingdom, his domain. "Need help?" he asked, his voice tentative, almost nervous. I almost said no. The refusal was right there on my tongue, automatic and defensive. But something made me pause, made me reach for a cutting board and slide it across the counter toward him. "Chop these tomatoes. Small pieces." We worked in silence for a while, the kind of companionable quiet that comes from shared tasks. Just the sound of knives on wood, rhythmic and steady, and water boiling on the stove, bubbling and hissing. The kitchen smelled like garlic and oregano. Then he spoke, breaking the careful peace we'd constructed. I was wrong about you. I kept stirring the sauce, watching the red swirl around the wooden spoon.
Didn't respond.
Didn't know what to say. I spent years trying to make you feel small because I felt small, he continued, his voice different now.
Softer.
Raw in a way I'd never heard before. You were smart, driven, talented, had your whole life ahead of you with potential I never had. And I was scared you'd show everyone what I really was. That you'd expose me. Which was what? I set the spoon down, turned to face him. He set down the knife carefully, like it was something dangerous he needed to disarm. A failure pretending to be successful. A man who inherited money from his father and lost it all through bad decisions and worse investments. Who married your mother not because I loved her the way she deserved, but because I needed someone to make me feel less alone. Less pathetic. I turned off the stove, the sudden silence almost deafening without the bubbling water. Looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived on my doorstep. Did you love her at all? He was quiet for a long time, so long I thought he might not answer. His jaw worked, his eyes focused on something far away that only he could see. I don't think I knew how to love anyone. Not really. I just knew how to control things, manipulate situations, make myself feel important. And when I couldn't control you, when you wouldn't bend or break or become what I wanted you to be, it made me crazy. Made me mean. You hurt her, I said, my voice steady but hard. That night she fell. You didn't just watch it happen. I know. His voice cracked like dry wood splitting. I grabbed her arm.
Hard.
Harder than I meant to. Harder than I should have. She pulled away and lost her balance at the top of the stairs, and I watched her fall. Watched her tumble down those steps, and I didn't help her up right away. I was too angry, too drunk, too wrapped up in my own wounded pride. And by the time I finally called the ambulance, by the time I realized what I'd done, I knew I'd destroyed everything. Everything good that was left. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. True in a way that couldn't be taken back or softened. She protected me anyway, I said quietly. Even after everything you did, everything you put her through, she made sure I'd be okay. She planned ahead, transferred everything to my name, made sure you couldn't touch what was rightfully mine. She was better than both of us. His eyes were wet now, tears threatening to spill. Better than either of us deserved. We ate dinner in silence after that, sitting across from each other at the table where we'd had so many terrible conversations. But it was a different kind of silence. Not hostile or charged with unspoken anger. Just two people who'd hurt each other, damaged each other in ways that couldn't be fully repaired, sitting across a table in a house that no longer felt like a battlefield. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and put away, I found Gordon standing in the hallway near the stairs. He was staring at the framed letter from my mother that I'd hung on the wall, the one Nina had given me. The one where she explained everything, her final words to me, her last act of love preserved behind glass. He reached out slowly, touched the glass gently with his fingertips like he was afraid it might burn him. She loved you, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. More than anything in this world. More than she ever loved me, and I knew it. I always knew it. I know. I wish. He stopped, his hand falling to his side. Swallowed hard, his throat working visibly. I wish I'd been the kind of man who deserved to be in her life. Who deserved either of you. Sometimes people don't need punishment or revenge or justice served cold. They need to see what they lost. They need to sit with the weight of their choices and feel the full measure of what they destroyed. Is that justice? Or just sadness? Tell me what you think. Gordon stayed for a week. Then 2. Then a month. We fell into a routine that felt almost normal. He'd work on projects around the house during the day. I'd come home from the shop, and we'd make dinner together. Sometimes we'd watch TV. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch and not say anything at all. He was different now. Quieter. More careful. Like he'd finally learned that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And he was trying in his broken way, to earn it back. One evening we were sitting outside watching the sun go down. The sky was orange and pink, the kind of sunset Mom used to love. Gordon had been quiet all day, more so than usual. "I need to tell you something," he finally said. I waited. "I'm sick." He said it simply. Matter of fact. Been to 3 doctors. They all say the same thing. 6 months. Maybe less. My chest tightened. "What is it?" "Liver." Years of drinking finally caught up. He smiled sadly. Ironic, right? I spent my whole life trying to control everything, and turns out I can't even control my own body. "There's treatment."
Surgery.
"We can."
No.
He shook his head. "I'm done fighting. Done pretending. I just want to spend whatever time I have left trying to be better than I was." We sat there as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Crickets started their evening song. The air smelled like cut grass and summer. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you deserve to know. And because," he paused, struggling with words, "because I want you to know that these last few weeks, living here, having you treat me with kindness I never earned, it's been the best month of my life." Something in my throat burned. I didn't want to feel sorry for him. Didn't want to care. But I couldn't help it. Because underneath all the anger and control and fear, Gordon was just a broken man who'd never learned how to be whole. "I forgive you," I said. The words came out before I could stop them. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "You shouldn't." "I know. But I do anyway." The next morning, Gordon packed his bag. I tried to convince him to stay, to let me take care of him. But he refused. "You've given me enough," he said. "More than I deserved. But I need to do this next part on my own." We stood at the door, the same door where he'd thrown me out, where my mother had stood silent, where everything had broken apart. He held out his hand. I shook it. "Thank you," he said, "for showing me what grace looks like." Then he walked away down the driveway, the morning sun on his back, headed toward whatever ending waited for him. I never saw him again. When someone who hurt you finally understands what they did, is forgiveness automatic? Or is it a choice you make despite everything? Drop your answer below. The letter came exactly 1 year later. I was in the garage working on a custom tool set for a client when the mail truck pulled up. Bills, mostly. Junk mail. And then a thick envelope from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter informing me that Gordon Hale had passed away 3 weeks prior. Liver failure, just like he'd said. And in his will, he'd left me everything he still owned. Which wasn't much. Some savings. A storage unit with his old belongings. And a letter addressed to me. I sat on the porch steps and opened it. His handwriting was shaky, like he'd written it near the end. "Calden," it started. "If you're reading this, I'm finally gone. Probably for the best. But before I went, I needed you to know something. That month I spent in your house changed me. You could have kicked me out. Could have made me suffer the way I made you suffer. But you didn't. You showed me what real strength looks like. Not control. Not anger. Just quiet kindness even when it's not deserved. I spent my whole life taking things that weren't mine. Your dignity, your mother's peace, your home. So I'm giving back the only thing I have left. Everything I own is yours now. Not because you need it, but because you taught me that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply being a better person than the one who hurt you. Thank you for that lesson. I hope wherever I'm going, your mother is there to forgive me too. Gordon." I folded the letter carefully. Put it next to my mother's in the hallway frame. 2 letters. 2 different kinds of love. 2 different kinds of ending. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd screamed, "Get out," and never come back, had made sure I'd never have to leave again. I walked out to the garden that afternoon. Mom's purple flowers were blooming, bright and full. I sat on the bench Dad built decades ago. The one Mom used to read on. The one Gordon never touched because it wasn't his to claim. And I thought about my mother's words. About patience. About silence being strength, not weakness. About how justice doesn't always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes quiet, like flowers blooming in a garden someone forgot to destroy. Sometimes the loudest revenge is just peace. I stayed there until sunset, watching the sky turn those colors Mom loved. Orange and pink and gold. And for the first time in years, I felt like everything had finally come full circle. Not because I'd won, but because I'd learned what my mother tried to teach me all along, that real power isn't about control. It's about choosing kindness when you have every reason to choose anger. That's the lesson Gordon learned too late. But at least he learned it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes the hardest thing is also the right thing, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we've got more stories like this coming. Stories about real people facing real struggles and finding strength they didn't know they had. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about a time someone hurt you and you chose grace instead of revenge. Your story might inspire someone else going through the same thing. We're building a family here, and we'd love for you to be part of it. Until next time, remember that sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers.